Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for being here this morning after such a wonderful and long-lasting dinner yesterday, which was a great commitment to our wonderful discipline. It's lovely to be here today, a year on almost exactly from the Paris Eagle Conference, where we presented the Ashmolean Latin Inscription Project, which is more affectionately known as AshLI, in its very early stages. And at that conference, we laid out rather what we were planning to do. And it's extremely nice to be able to come back a year later, having benefited from some collaborations that we made at that conference in Paris, to be able to tell you some of the things that we now have done. It is a useful opportunity that now the epigraphic community is here to point out a little bit of a change in our team lineup from the last time that they were presented. As has already been mentioned, the Ashmolean Latin Inscriptions Project is a three-way collaboration between three big institutions. Professor Alison Cooley is the head of classics at Warwick University, and for our project she is in charge of producing the epigraphic editions in the purest epigraphic form. My job is primarily public engagement, which was considered quite unusual at the time to have a full-time member of the epigraphic team whose job is to produce storytelling blog, and I promised the gentleman from Berlin that I would give the statistics of that. We have, since we started, 15,000 separate users and 30,000 page views. We get about between 800 and 1,500 readers a month, and more than half of those are in the United States. So the use of social media for the promotion and storytelling in inscriptions has been extremely valuable for us. Hannah Cornwell, based in Oxford but under Warwick's banner, is in charge of the technological aspects which include Epidoc. It was interesting to hear Andreas speak yesterday about the decision to keep both a paper version and an online version for Byzantine inscriptions. For this, because of our emphasis on public engagement, we've decided to go completely online. There will be no paper version of this database. And it also contributes with our podcasts. Paul Roberts is the new face in that he's the new keeper of antiquities at the Ashmolean Museum. And Charles Crowther and Ben Altschuler at the end here have been helping us with reflectance transformation imaging. We've used RTI an awful lot on our project for reading and imaging inscriptions that are too worn to be seen with the naked eye, or where we'd like to investigate erasures on the stone to produce the new editions. Because we've got this team with varying different skills, we've produced media of very varying sorts. And when it comes to building the database, it means that, very much like Nadia just showed, we also have things like audio files where we have metrical inscriptions that are being read aloud. We have RTI files that people can download. The idea is not to keep any of this background material to ourselves, but to make it available to the public too. The impulse of the Ashmolean Latin Inscriptions Project was to catch up on some housekeeping that was long overdue. The last time that the Ashmolean took an inventory of its Latin inscriptions collection was in 1763. And this was in Richard Chandler's Marmora Oxoniensia. An awful lot has changed in the Ashmolean collection, and we've made quite a number of acquisitions. And so now, after this long period, we are in a position to start presenting people with what we've discovered we had in our stores. In Paris, I confidently announced that I thought we had about 300 inscriptions. As we've already heard from colleagues yesterday, we've discovered, in fact, we have considerably more than 300 inscriptions, and we think we're up to about 450 and counting. One of the challenges in presenting the inscriptions project, but in many ways one of its joys, is its great variety. We haven't selected this corpus on the basis of its geographical origin. We haven't chosen it on the basis of its chronological bracket. Instead, we are given a ready-made corpus that is physically based in a museum, which gives us very concrete boundaries, but that was simply arrived there because of the particular whims of particular collectors. Those particular collectors had extremely varied ideas about what was beautiful and interesting. We have extremely varied supports for our inscriptions. We have the traditional stones, we have a very large collection of brick stamps. We also have gold glass, these early Christian bases vessels with the gold leaf sandwiched between the two glass faces, which has created its own problems with the coding. A lot of pottery, glassware, a very fine collection of sling bullets with polite and not so polite insults to the enemy on them, gems, jewellery, metalware, and also applied letters, which have also raised certain questions about how you categorise those as inscriptions. So this varied collection has produced varied problems, and turning this into Epidoc has made us ask questions about material that traditionally wasn't treated in the same way. When our principal investigator, Alison Cooley, came, for example, to sling bullets, we began by following the cataloguing traditions that were usually used for sling bullets, and they're in fact very different and ask different questions to, say, stone monuments. Now that we're using Epidoc, we're beginning to ask consistent and coherent questions, the same questions to each different type of material that usually are not asked, and it's been extremely interesting to see how we've had to challenge material that usually is not given such a hard time. I'd like to pass over to Hannah Cornwell now, who's going to run you through some particular case studies of the challenges that we've met in trying to deal with this very varied corpus. Hannah, thank you.
Thank you. I'd just like to start with a disclaimer, and this is similar to Nadia. Whilst the Ashmolean project is coming to the end of its second year, in terms of actually encoding the documents, we're only really 9 months in. So it has been a bit of a learning curve, and the questions we've been asking have evolved as we've got to grips with the material. We actually started off encoding the more traditional monumental stone inscriptions, and it's only really been the last sort of 3 or 4 months that we've turned to the slightly more unusual inscriptions. And this workshop has actually come at a very opportune time. The questions that we were asked to consider about the physical support or about the execution of the technique obviously are very much interrelated, and as Janie has shown, we have such a wide variety of material supports. I should also point out we're only about halfway through the 400 plus inscriptions that Janie mentioned in terms of encoding, and we're only really getting onto the sort of more unusual objects now. So the case studies I'm going to take you through are just sort of, I suppose, the tip of the iceberg of some of the problems and questions we've been asking. Some problems may not be problems to people in the audience at all. I'm relying on the expertise of you to sort of point out what is perhaps very, very obvious to you, and I have just been not noticing what I should be doing. I just want to sort of go through... before that, I should also say we're about to start trialling our database as part of the Ashmolean website. We're working with the IT officer there, Jonathan Moffat, and he's going to be the one responsible for designing our style sheets. Currently, we've been working with the example style sheets of Epidoc, and we heard yesterday about some of the issues that the creation of new or unbounded values might have in the transformation and crosswalking of Epidoc into HTML. So if anyone has any good suggestions about some of the new values I'm proposing as to how to deal with them in style sheets, that would be very helpful to take back to the Ashmolean. I just want to go through 2 sort of categories of interest that relate to the encoding of the text. The first one being concerning textual transcriptions. We have a number of glyphs and symbols. Some are quite obviously usual and traditional: crosses, Cairo, centurion mark, Cistercius mark, leaf interpuncts. Some numerals which are slightly unusual in their form, but they can be dealt with probably with Unicode, and the Gaia mark, which I'll just take as a case study. The second category of textual transcriptions is questions about the form and appearance of the characters, and we have one interesting case study which I'd be interested to have people's opinion on about how to encode. The second category is the layout of the text, so the direction of the text, or ductus, as we heard talked about yesterday, and we have quite a few examples which are in circles or semicircles due to the nature of the support, and finally the execution of the writing and how that relates in some instances quite intimately to the physical support. Just to start with actually something which is not actually, in a sense, at the off the beaten track. Our monumental stone inscriptions are quite obviously sort of a standard practice of epigraphy, but looking at how to encode the Gaia mark. And it was interesting hearing Julia yesterday talk about the difference between inverted letters in archaic inscriptions versus classical Latin epigraphy, and it was very interesting hearing what she said about how in the archaic inscriptions these are just inverted letters with no significance, whereas obviously ours have a meaning embedded in it. when I was thinking about how to encode the Gaia mark, I couldn't find anything on the Epidoc website which was specifically about Gaia marks, although I did speak to Charlotte Tupman, who suggested using Unicode to get the letter form. And I've been looking at different databases to see how they handle it. I can't find a consistent way of handling or encoding the Gaia mark, but it might be out there, I've just missed it. So Quintilian says that the name Gaius is signified by the letter C, and that when this is inverted, it means woman. So in that case, is it just as Julia suggested yesterday about being an inverted symbol? Well, we know from what Julia said yesterday that that's not going to make any sense because it's not telling us the significant information that is embedded in that character. So is it a symbol, a glyph? Which is, the first example here is what I was initially going with, glyph type Gaia, Unicode, and the second example is what I found on the epigraphic database Romana. However, going on what Quintilian says, we take Gaius C as an abbreviation, an expansion. So should we actually be looking at Gaia as a glyph within an abbreviation? I quite like this example, but I don't know if there is a standard form out there, so we'll be very happy to hear about that. Moving on to other issues relating to the form and appearance of the text, we have quite standard characters that are required to be highlighted with epidocs such as ligatures, superlinear lines, super and subscripts. But this is one example which I think I haven't been able to find a standard value to encode for it. This is our, as it were, youngest inscription. It's from the 11th century AD. It's called the Odder Stone, and it's sort of out on a limb in terms of the chronology of most of our material. I haven't got around to encoding it yet because we haven't got to its critical edition. But I hope you can see from the picture that there are several letters within letters. They're not ligature, they're not attached, but they are inside the previous character. And so, obviously, we can create new values for the rend attribute. The ones I've been thinking about are inside previous. Obviously, this is going to cause problems with the style sheets because currently the Epidoc example style sheets can't handle new values in this attribute. But any suggestions as to how to handle that? Julia was talking yesterday about having arrows. Obviously, I'm not quite sure how we would handle this one, but any suggestions are very welcome. We have quite a few inscriptions, as I mentioned, where the direction of the text is interesting, a lot of them in circles, which again is not a value that the style sheets can deal with at the moment, but something to think about. As Janie mentioned earlier, the gold glass, which is obviously a very interesting material and medium for us, has caused some sort of questions about how we think about the execution of the technique. And actually it was when we were invited to speak here that we were asked about the gold glass, because Susan Walker, who was previously part of the project, has been working a lot on it. We have yet to get to the gold glass as part of our sort of cataloguing, but the invitation did cause us to think about how do we actually describe the execution of the technique. And as Janie said, it's a thin layer of gold leaf between glass. We have decided that it is it's an additional hard technique. It's applied letters between the glass, and actually this is where the Eagle vocabulary, control vocabularists really helped us in deciding what they were, because we were sort of thinking a lot about how we should describe this technique, and then I remember that the vocabulary list existed, and we looked at them, and there of course was a quite clear definition of how to deal with gold leaf between glass. Other additional hard techniques in the execution of the writing, we also have painted vessels. We have impression soft technique executions, such as in pressed. We have it both in terms of sigillata, brick stamps, and also the moulds for terra sigillata. And then we also have moulded items, so from a liquid form, that our slingshot bullets are very nice examples of. We also have glass vessels which have text moulded on them as well, which I assume, considering it was molten material when it's formed, would also count as an X-former. We also have subtractive hard techniques in the execution, so the very traditional engraved stone inscription. We have some items which are graffitoed. We have one item which is punched. We have some items which are engraved in the traditional sense of engraving metal. We've been trying to think about how to deal with gemstones, because although there is the key engraved. What I read on the control vocabulary on Eagle, this is normally referring to engravings on metal, and obviously we're not dealing with metal, with gemstones. Possibly it could be perforated or bored, which is one of the control vocabularies that exist. The second example, sort of incised letters, I came up with mainly because talking to a colleague who works on gemstones, and I asked her how would you describe the execution. She wasn't 100% sure, but she did tell me that Pliny uses the verb incido when he's describing gemstones. But if anyone has dealt with gemstones and how to describe their technique, we'd love to hear from you. Quite a few of our inscriptions have retrograde characters, and we saw Julia talking yesterday about how the direction of the text is used to explain this, rather than using an inverted character, because it's not just one character here that is inverted, but the entire text. And what's particularly interesting with our examples is the reason why they are reversed or retrograde. As you can see, we have a gemstone, we have the moulds for terracotta sigillata, and in the top corner a brick stamp. The gemstones and the moulds are obviously reversed because they are within a process of production. The ultimate final image will be from left to right rather than right to left. The brick stamp is an unusual example. All our brick stamps are normally, well, in a circle or left-right, and here we've actually got the mould, which is in the traditional left-right direction, and the stamp has come out right-left. Thinking about these inverted or retrograde characters in our inscriptions sort of got us thinking about this relationship between the execution of the text and the material support. And when we're dealing with a textual edition and encoding that, we're concerned about what the letters say, the abbreviations, any particular things that need highlighting with the characters. But when we deal with the physical support, we're concerned about the execution, the material. We have one final case study which is, we think, quite interesting because it seems to sort of join these two ideas together, and the questions of how we then encode that become potentially problematic. Well, we're scratching our heads about it. So this is one of our brick stamps, and it's obviously quite interesting because we've got the direction of the text in a semicircle as well as left-right. This is a mid-1st century AD Flavian brick stamp. It's produced by two different brickyards. That's the information it tells us. At the top there is how the diplomatic and the edition, which is what Alison has produced, and you can see in the second line that there is an erasure in the traditional Leiden convention and how I have encoded it. But when I started to think about this and actually look at the object itself, I realised that it's not an erasure in the traditional sense. When we traditionally think of erasures, and this is an example of a very similar brick stamp produced from the same yard, obviously from a different mould. Alison's commentary says we're not entirely sure why part of the word has been erased because it's intact in other stamps. But when we traditionally think of an erasure, we think about a subtractive technique from the surface, where negative impressions left, something is cut away. This is another example from our collection. This is an altar where the name of Geta, Caracalla's brother, has been obviously removed. And if you want to read more about this inscription, Jane's written a very good article on our blog about it. But that's the traditional way that an erasure appears. However, our erasure stands proud from the surface. It's not negative, it's actually up and raised, it's in relief. And the reason for that is the erasure does not exist on the physical support of the brick stamp. The erasure was created in the mould. So whilst the erasure exists in terms of the text, it's not on the physical stamp in the traditional sense. So then this brings up interesting questions about the relationship, particularly when you have the mould. That's where the erasure starts. So are we correct in defining the missing letters as an erasure in the textual tradition when the physical support displays something different? So this is one of our sort of more interesting head-scratching moments. If anyone has any suggestions, we'd love to hear. And finally, I will allow Janie to say.
So there's no need to copy down any URLs. We've got the information that you see here on the board on a portable postcard form, so please do collar either Hannah or I at coffee if you have any suggestions about the encoding or you'd like to get in touch about the blogging aspect or any part of the database. We're really very keen to make links with everybody, so please do come and find us at coffee. But thank you very much.